Hello, beautiful people. Hello, hello. Welcome back to another episode of Just Mental. I'm your host, Kendall, and today I'm very excited to be here because I have something I want to talk about that I feel came to me at the perfect time, and I'm going to explain that in a little bit. But basically, here's the situation. So I was scrolling on LinkedIn, as a person does, someone who's obsessed with their phone. And this is going to be a very important detail once we get into all of it. But I'm scrolling on my phone. I'm on LinkedIn, and I come across this post. Now, there's a lot of content on LinkedIn. There's a lot of content, period, on the internet. And we often find ourselves like feeding through stuff to figure out what is worth consuming and what is worth throwing in the garbage or scrolling past or whatever. And this particular post that I want to talk about today was actually in regards to Chris Rock and his recent launch with Netflix on his live comedy show. Now, the conversation that I want to have today is a very charged one. I feel like it needs to be had, and there's a very important conversation that I feel a lot of information is missing from, which is why I feel it is so important that we sit here and we talk about this today. But the premise of this post and the reason why I care so much about it is because, first and foremost, he starts off this entire segment for the first 20 minutes of his live comedy segment on Netflix. He starts off by talking about this apparent addiction in America. And this is not the addiction of opioids. It is not the addiction, heroin, cocaine, crack, drugs, whatever you want to call it. He says that's not the biggest addiction in America. That's not the biggest threat of addiction to America. The biggest addiction in America is attention. We are addicted to attention. And what exactly does that mean? Because when I first read that, I'm like, okay, I kind of get where you're going with this. I kind of see where the ideas are forming, but I'm a little bit lost. So I continued to read into this. And just for clarity, if you haven't seen this video, I am going to leave a link in the bottom so you can go watch it. But I'm also going to just read a little bit of this LinkedIn post so you can gain some clarity on what this topic is about. I do not have the poster's name, so if I find it, I will also credit them. Very wise person who wrote this, and thank you for bringing this conversation up. But here we go. Basically, Chris Rock is hitting hard on the hypocrisy of cancel culture, the woke trap, and he spent the better part of an hour explaining why the emergency rooms of America are filled up with people with paper cuts. Now, when I read that sentence, I'm like, okay, this is crazy. I don't think many people are talking about this, but it's also incredibly eye-opening to hear a statement like that. Just think about it. In America, especially, I mean, in Canada, it's a little bit different because we have federally funded healthcare. It doesn't cost you to go to the emergency room with, say, a paper cut if that was what you were going to go to the emergency room for. However, in a place like America, and I can't really understand this, going to the doctor for a paper cut is probably going to cost you, don't quote me on this, $2,000-ish. One, just to sit there for probably 4+ hours, and two, to see a doctor who's going to give you a bandage that you could have bought at the drugstore. Now, I don't say this to be condescending, but it goes back to this idea that we are craving and addicted to attention. And whatever attention we can get is the attention that we warrant receiving. Now, if that means that you have to go to the doctor for a paper cut, that's what you're going to do because you are addicted to the feeling of being seen. They want to basically bring attention to this issue that people will do whatever they can to feed this addiction of attention. And if you know anything about addiction, which I'm not personally experienced with myself, I know people who've suffered from addiction. And I also know a couple people who've been really close to people who have battled addiction and come out of it on the other side. But there's a lot of people who don't come out on the other side. And we see it all the time with celebrities. They're going to rehab centers and they're seeking professional help. And basically what I'm trying to say is addiction is not a joke. Addiction is very serious. and it has potentially life-threatening consequences. We see it with alcoholics, we see it with drug addicts. And Chris Rock's whole approach to this conversation and whole message surrounding this conversation is that we have become accustomed to playing the victim, and we have become accustomed to seeking out attention and validation in every way, shape, or form possible. Now, I'm going to take this back a little bit and speak from personal experience. I'm a little bit more mature now than I was 2 to 3 years ago, so I can speak to that part of my life with 2020 vision, so to speak. When I was in high school, I literally would have done anything. I was 100% addicted to receiving attention. I'd show up to parties and do the stupidest shit just so that people would take a video of me and put me on their story. That's how, and it's very embarrassing to actually say that out loud, but that was the place in my life that I was at. Fast forward to now, I've come into myself a little bit more. I feel like I've matured emotionally and physically a little bit more. And so I don't seek out that validation in the same way. Now you're probably sitting there like, okay, well, Kendall, you don't really post on okay, you don't have to post on social media to seek out validation and attention. And seeking out validation and attention doesn't look like just posting on social media. Now, before someone comes at me, social media is a fantastic tool. It is a networking tool at its core, but it has also presented some very unique challenges and frustrations and addictions, so to speak. And this idea of craving and the addiction to attention, I feel in some way, shape, or form is in part due to the large and overwhelming presence of social media in our lives, especially young people's lives. Now, this kind of garners a very specific conversation, and take what I'm going to say with a grain of salt, because again, personally speaking, do I still use social media to have people look at me and to compliment me? Of course. I'm not going to be a hypocrite here. I 100% post on social media when I feel really great so that I can get that validation. That is, if you don't do that, then I would love to know why you post on social media if it's not to get validation externally from either a guy that you really like or your boyfriend, or, there's always a reason. You're not just posting on social media because you want to post on social media. And especially as a woman, there is always a charge or a reason behind that initiative to do something like that. Now, before I get distracted, there have been numerous studies conducted on the impact of social media, especially on young women. And this addiction to attention, I think, is very largely in part due to the fact that from the second that you start going to school, and I'm seeing kids as young as like 7, 8 years old have a phone. When I was growing up, my parents told me I wasn't allowed a phone until I needed one. And I guess need is a very subjective term, because a lot of parents say, well, my kid needs to be able to communicate with you. Not really. Your kid goes to school, they take the bus home, or you pick them up. What do they really need to communicate with you? I can't relate on that personal aspect. If you've gotten a phone when you were really young, let me know. My brother was the youngest one out of all 3 of us siblings to get one, and I think he was 15. So we were the last ones in our friends group. And to be honest, it didn't really affect me that much. I would probably go as far as to say I was much happier when I didn't have a phone, because I was naive enough not to know what was going on in the world. And that is a privilege. I truly think that was a privilege, not having a phone and having access to all of this craziness that's going on in the world right now. And more specifically, social media, particularly Instagram. I remember when I first got my iPod. It was like a 3rd generation. The thing's ancient now, like dinosaur bones. And I remember getting this iPod and thinking to myself, oh my God, my life is going to change. There's Snapchat, there's Instagram. Instagram was a baby. It was just coming out. And if I could show you some of the stuff I put on this platform when I was like, I must have been like 14, 15 years old. It's embarrassing, as I'm sure a lot of people's old vintage Instagram feeds are. By now, they're probably all deleted and they're in the abyss of the virtual world. But regardless, I mean, back then when I first got Instagram, it was fun. The only point of posting on there was for fun. Like, I wanted to post with my friends and I wanted to post about the things that I loved. And there was no need for me to receive likes or comments or external validation. If my friends commented on my stuff, I loved it. It felt great. But I wasn't searching for that. I wasn't anticipating it every time I posted something. And I think that's the joy of being a kid. And that was the joy of experiencing social media in an infancy like that, because there wasn't this pressure for things that you put on there to be perfect and for this image that you are portraying to be perfect. And that's where I feel the problem starts to come in. I don't remember the exact time when this narrative on social media started to flip, where now it's like, oh my God, there is a lot of beautiful women on this app. There is a lot of really fit women on this app. And I remember, having conversations with my friends about, I'm sure you've all had these conversations where you take a bunch of pictures at a social gathering, a social event, a birthday party, be what it is. And you're all sitting there and you're like, no, don't post that one. No, don't post that one. I don't look good in that one. You just can't post this one. Just please don't post that one. And I look back and I'm like, okay, Kendall, why did you care so much? Why did you care so much? And this was when I was in about grade 8 or 9. So I was about 14, 15 years old. And the external validation factor of social media was really starting to play a role in how I wished to be perceived by both people I went to school with and people who just randomly came across my profile. So there was this need to be liked online, and there was this need to come across as this beautiful, perfect, angelic figure on my Instagram. And if you've had a conversation like that with your friends, you will also know the other side of it, where they post the one where they look better and you look like shit. And you see it on your feed and there's just this pit in the bottom of your stomach about how horrible that picture makes you feel, how horrible you look in the picture that you didn't want posted. But again, it goes back to this idea that, okay, well, maybe I didn't look good, but it's not my profile. So someone else is taking the picture where they feel they look the best and posting that. And your friends are always going to sit there and they're going to say, Kendall, you don't look that bad. Come on, you don't look that bad. Like, it's not a bad picture. And I remember having a lot of those conversations because I was never really posting on my Instagram that much when I was in high school. My friends posted more than me. And so I was usually giving feedback on what pictures not to post versus like actually picking the ones I wanted to and putting them on my profile. Regardless, a lot of young women can relate to that gut-wrenching feeling where you see that picture and it's like, oh my God, they posted the one I didn't want. The only one that I told you not to post. And I think another instance where we see this a lot is almost like the reverse effect of what I'm talking about right now is, for example, if it's your birthday and your best friend posts something on Snapchat. Like, I used to do this all the time with my friends when I was in high school, and I'd find the ugliest picture of them, what I perceived to be the ugliest photo of them, whether they were making a stupid face or they were just caught off guard and they claimed it was a bad picture of themselves. I would find that and I would post it and I would use that as a happy birthday, I love you, blah, blah, blah. I think everybody does that. I think everybody does. And it's so weird to me because when you try so hard in your teenage years to make sure nothing like that ever gets onto the internet, and now you're in a position where you're like, oh my God, I need to find the worst picture of them. I have to, because that's the only way I'm going to get attention from this post. And it all comes back to this idea that we're literally starving for attention. And whether that's because social media has bred it into us or not, there is this apparent lack of realism in our world. You go on Instagram now and you go on your explore feed. I don't know how often people scroll on there. I have a very high screen time. I'm typically on my phone way longer than I should be. Don't worry, I'm working on it. It's an addiction. And I laugh when I say that because that's literally what I am trying to say that I don't do, and I just admitted that I do it. And I think that's just a testament to the fact that social media, and more specifically our phones, and the impact that those have on our mental health is actually immense. It is more immense than I think most people even begin to realize. Why? Because our phones are literally an extension of the lives and the image in which we wish to be seen. I don't remember the last time I said to myself, "Okay, Kendall, we're going to go take really awful pictures, and then I'm going to pick the worst one and I'm going to put that on my Instagram feed, or I'm going to put it on my story." No. As a young woman, as someone who wishes to be desirable and to be liked and to be popular, or to at least be viewed as beautiful in some regard, I will only take pictures of myself when I feel good. And with the rare exception of taking gym progress pictures, I do not take out my phone, especially my front camera, on those days where I feel shitty. And for whatever reason that is, call it what you want. It doesn't really matter. What does matter is that we have become so accustomed to this idea of perfectionism that we, again, are addicted to attention. And let's go back to this idea of Instagram and this perfectionism mindset for a second. There was a YouTuber that I actually followed a couple years ago. I don't really watch YouTube anymore, but her entire channel was built on trying to prove that Instagram models and celebrities do not actually look the way that they look in their Instagram pictures. And I think in the back of our minds, we know that like, you don't actually look like that. Maybe you do to some extent, but you're definitely hiding something, regardless of what that is, however big or small. You see all these people calling out the Kardashians, calling out these models for photoshopping their pictures. And then you see YouTubers literally coming onto their platforms to say, "I'm not going to Photoshop anymore." I can't remember the first video I ever watched where someone came out and actually said that, but it was powerful. And what was even more powerful is the fact that I'd been watching and consuming her content for years, thinking that, you know, she didn't edit her stuff. She didn't edit it. And that right there is, I think, where the problem lies, specifically in this idea that what you see online is not actually what real life is. Now, obviously, social media is a highlight reel. Take it with a grain of salt. What you're seeing is somebody's best moments, and you can't compare that. You can't compare someone else's highlight reel to your everyday life. It's just not, like, that's not fair. You're setting yourself up to be disappointed and to be constantly feeling like you're not doing enough. But I can guarantee you that everybody's life does not look or is not actually the way that they portray it to be on social media. If you went and looked on my social media, which I encourage you to do, it looks like I have a fantastic life. And I can tell you, I've struggled more with feeling unfulfilled and purposeless in this world than I care to admit. But why would I dare share that with the internet? And that's the funny paradox in all of this, is that nobody else really cares what you're doing except for you. You think that everybody else cares. And don't get me wrong, like, obviously influencers have this obligation to share their lives, and they've made their life into almost a form of entertainment for people to watch. So there's this obligation that you have to continue to share your life, and that those people that are loyal subscribers or loyal fans, they do genuinely care about you to some extent. But at the end of the day, the only person that cares about the stuff that you put online to the extent to which you are addicted to feeling is yourself. And I hate that that is the conversation that we have to have. Because if I told you that every single one of my pictures was photoshopped, you probably would look at me a little bit differently. And that's where this sense of inadequacy and this inability to trust people comes from, because you're like, okay, well, how do I know that their photos aren't photoshopped? Almost every single girl I know has used an editing app, myself included, to brighten a picture, to take out blemishes, to remove something, or to change something about the way that they look in a picture. And I think once you understand that that's what people are doing and that's the side of themselves that they are showing you on the internet, it's really going to become clear to you that, life is not what it appears to be. And that this idea that we need to be liked and we need to constantly get attention from people outside of our circle or outside of our loved ones, external validation, what does that really get you at the end of the day? I had to sit myself down and I had to actually ask myself these questions because I was getting so wrapped up in this idea of, oh my God, I need to look a certain way. Otherwise people won't like me. People don't remember you for how you looked. Unless, of course, we're talking about like first impressions, whatever. That's a different situation. And most of the time, those conversations are being had about physical interactions where face to face you actually meet somebody. I forgot the train of thought that I was saying. But anyways, how can you compare yourself? And what are you actually getting out of an interaction with someone online? And there are studies everywhere about this, the impact of social media on young girls' image, how eating disorders have been bred from social media, and this idea that we have to look constantly perfect all the time. And I think we're seeing a bit of a shift towards influencers actually showing you what they actually look like, because you can look ripped in the morning. And if you've ever been to the gym, if you've ever worked out, if you've ever stuck to a program for a very long time, I'm sure you don't look the same in the morning when you first wake up on an empty stomach, not having eaten, than you do right before you go to bed. I can almost guarantee you nobody looks the same between the same 12 hours of a day. But this all goes to say that this idea of being liked and this addiction to attention that our society so clearly has is, and we see this on TikTok a lot too, where we have, or you look at like TMZ or all of these really big publications that literally thrive on creating clickbait titles to draw up and stir up attention. Mostly because people care more about the negative stuff than they do about the positive stuff. And I hope that we can start to shift that narrative where you don't feel like you have to bring other people down or you have to constantly see the flaws and things in order to feel better about yourself. That, personally speaking, is something I've really struggled with, is figuring out, okay, Kendall, you are okay on your own. Comparison is the thief of joy. You do not need to be perfect to be liked, and you do not need to be perfect to love yourself, because if you waited until you were perfect to post that Instagram picture or to try out for that thing that you've always wanted to do, if you waited until you felt like you were absolutely perfect, it's never going to happen. Why? Because we have this constant external pressure and constant fear of inadequacy, because we've been shown and we've been immersed in this culture of consuming content where people are perfect, by society standards, perfect. Whether that's appearance-wise or whatever, usually it's appearances, and I'm going to speak specifically to appearances because as a young woman, there is this external pressure, especially from what we feel is from men, picking on us, telling us that we need to look a certain way, whatever. I think a lot of that comes from us comparing ourselves to other women as well. My thighs aren't big enough, or my thighs are too big, or my face doesn't have the symmetricalness of that model I saw on the catwalk. Honestly, I want you to just try this and see the impact that it has on your life. Sit down and ask yourself, what am I benefiting from sitting here and comparing myself to all these people? And how much time in my day am I spending doing that? Because if you can hold yourself accountable to the amount of hours that you spend comparing yourself to people on the internet, and myself included, I'm very guilty of stuff like this, where I feel like, oh my God, I can't be on Instagram anymore. I'm seeing, and I'll find myself having conversations where I'm with myself where I'm like, why can't I just look like that? What do I have to do to look like that? And I want this to be a reminder that you don't have to look a certain way to feel happy or to feel good about yourself. And as someone who has experienced massive weight loss changes and thinking that weight loss is tied to happiness, it is not. You have this perception that in order to feel good about yourself, you have to be liked by other people. You have to be popular on social media. You have to have tons of followers. You have to have tons of likes. if you post something and nobody comments on it, it's a failure. When did our society shift to this mindset? I'm like genuinely trying to think back to when I was that kid just getting on Instagram for fun. And now all of a sudden you have days where I don't even want to look at Instagram because I'm scared of what I might see on there. And not scared from a perspective of like, oh my God, this is going to hurt me, but scared of like, oh my God, I'm going to see something and I'm going to wish I could change my entire life to look like that. I mean, a lot of marketing ideas are built on this very concept, feeding into your emotions and making you feel like you need something in order to look or feel a certain type of way. Now, I'm going to bring this back to that conversation around the addiction to attention and how everybody feels as though they're the victim. I think that in a lot of ways, our society has gotten more comfortable with speaking up about issues. I also think that we have gotten quite a bit less resilient to problems in our lives. Now there's much more complacency in dealing with issues. I'm not speaking to mental health related problems. I think that is a conversation all on its own. But when you have people complaining about their life 24/7 and then making a video about it and putting it on social media, but yet making no hard changes or tangible changes to their life in order to start feeling better, I think that's where this victim mentality comes in. And we are, as a society, not as strong, I don't think, as we used to be. We are conditioned to getting everything that we want right now. And I think that breeds into this sense of this addiction of attention. If I wanted to go to eat, I don't have to now sit at a restaurant for 20 minutes. I can just order a plate of food from Earl's from my phone on my couch at my apartment and have it basically delivered 5 steps away to my door. There is this sense of convenience, and that convenience breeds entitlement. That if you can't have something right now, there's something wrong with that. Whereas if you look at 20, 30 years ago, there was a lot more patience and waiting and hard work and perseverance that was required in order to get a lot of things. Now it's just, and it's done. And I think that definitely feeds into this idea that we as a society are addicted to attention. And I think negative attention is a really big one that goes to the cancel culture idea that, it's much easier to feed into negative attention because then you don't have to focus on yourself. You can, in some sense, be a part of, in your mind, a moral obligation to right what you feel has been wronged. And I think that's the whole purpose of cancel culture, is to basically throw in people's faces that they made a mistake. And while they are human, and that is something that humans do, it will not be tolerated as a society. And I can't imagine the pressure. I'm sure one day I'm going to face something like that where people are not going to like what I have to say and they're going to try to cancel me. And, the word itself is extremely, like, if you cancel somebody, you're just not engaging with them anymore. If you cancel your Netflix subscription, you're not going to watch Netflix anymore. And I guess it's been taken to such a big extreme where now people are like, get on the bandwagon of canceling so-and-so. And again, if you're the first person to say you're canceled, then that feels good because now you're leading this movement towards this negative attention that person is experiencing. And any place where you can foster up attention to some regard, especially on a very global scale or in the sense of social media, if you're getting a lot of attention or likes or follows or views from a certain type of thing that you're going to say, you're going to keep producing that kind of content. And negative content always sells. So when it comes to social media and this idea of constantly seeking validation and attention, I don't think that's ever going to go away until we can sit down collectively and say, you know what we see online is not the whole picture. And I think, again, in the back of our minds, we know that, but are we going to come out and say, You know what? Maybe social media isn't as big of a part of our lives as we all need it to be. I think one of the things that has really scared me is it's like, okay, we have social media, we have these images and these appearances that we're presenting on these platforms. What happens if that disappears? Does that scare you? Would it scare you if social media, if Instagram, if TikTok were gone the next day? Because for me, I've gone through phases where I'm like, oh my God, if it goes away, I lose my job. If it goes away, I can't spread this message the way that I want to. And I've also gone through periods where it's like, oh my God, like what kind of world are we going to live in if we don't have social media? If I can't tell my friends that I'm eating oatmeal for breakfast, what kind of world are we going to live in? And when you put it that way, it sounds ridiculous. It honestly sounds ridiculous that you need to share a picture of your food in order to feel fulfilled in your day. But I want you to genuinely answer the question, whether you talk to someone about it or you just write it down. How would you feel if social media were just gone tomorrow? Would that scare you? Would that overwhelm you? Would it excite you? Would it make you feel relieved? Because I think the answer to that question is the answer to this whole addiction to attention. Because social media is plain and simple the fastest way to get attention. And you're not posting on social media just because. Unless you can prove to me that you have another ulterior motive besides getting more eyes on you in some way, shape, or form. Whether you're a business, a creator, or just a person trying to get something, whether it be likes, validation, etc. You can't tell me that there's not a reason why you posted that Instagram story where you looked hot as hell. You can't tell me, because I know when I post that stuff, there is an audience that I intend to see it. And that is where this addiction to attention comes from. Plain and simple. We want attention because we've been raised in a society that prioritizes convenience, and attention is so deeply tied to how we view ourselves and how we perceive our own self-image. It is literally tied together like two peas in a pod. And I would love if someone could come in here and prove me wrong. But from my experience and comparing that girl that just downloaded the app so that she could post selfies with her best friend just for, let's say it, shits and giggles, to now calculating and taking 100 pictures on a tripod to then narrowing it down to 2 or 3, asking my friends for their advice on where I look the best, and then posting that so that I can get 100, 200 likes. And if it doesn't perform well, deleting it or just feeling bad about myself. The two are completely intertwined. And I would love for someone to sit me down and prove me wrong. Social media is destroying our youth. It is destroying our future. It is destroying our present because we cannot focus on the present because we're so tied into what other people have done in the past. And I get that some people have a really purpose-driven reason for posting on social media. And I'm sure to some extent, most people do. But this idea that we are addicted to attention 1000% stems from the convenience of having social media at our fingertips. Social media is the root of all attention-seeking diseases.